Guys, we have got some potent builds this season. We've even started a new series called Build Battles, where essentially you can nominate your favorite build to go head to head against someone else's favorite build. With that being said though, I wanted to cover this build before anyone else did, that being Stacy's Curse. Now this was a build we talked about way back when Verglass first dropped on us. But we've had some Stasis changes since then, most notably the changes we got this past season. And despite how potent our solar builds are, I'm gonna show you why Stacy is still a fantastic build in ad-dense environments. Now, for those that are not familiar with Stacy, essentially, you're on Warlock. You're gonna be rocking Stasis, therefore running Shadebinder. For our abilities, we have a Healing Rift, Penumbral Blast, and Cold Snap Grenades. Now, our grenade choice here is very important because you can actually use the grenade itself, or you can utilize it, converting it into a Stasis turret, hence the name Stacy. This is done with the aspect Bleak Watcher. Now, the reason why I bring this up is because there are times where you just don't have enough time to charge up that nade. You gotta throw down that Cold Snap to get the freezes off. The beautiful thing is that with the right fragment combinations, you'll actually give yourself a grenade charge almost right back, if not both grenade charges. Now, we obviously like the turret the most because placing this turret down will allow it to automatically slow and freeze targets completely independent of us. And the beautiful thing about enemy AI inside of Destiny is they have no idea how to deal with these turrets. They focus on us and completely leave the turret alone, which means our turret could sit there going to pound town, freezing opponents over and over. Now, for our second aspect, we have Ice Flare Bolts. You see, Ice Flare Bolts is definitely the best when it comes to spawning those extra freezing seekers whenever a frozen target is shattered from any source, I might add, and it just continues to freeze everything. But the synergy continues with some new additions this season. On our artifact, we have a couple artifact mods that are very strong. The first perk has a tangible effect on our gameplay here called Pillar of Ice. This artifact perk reads, defeating an encased combatant will spawn a stasis crystal. That means any target that is frozen and then defeated will give you a stasis crystal. Subsequently, it will also proc Ice Flare Bolts, continuing to freeze. You see the synergy here, guys? It's almost like running three aspects. Now, our next artifact perk is Held the Storm. It states that shattering encased targets and stasis crystals deal increased damage. Shattering stasis crystals release shards of ice that damage and slow targets. This is enhancing our build on a whole nother level. You gotta understand, guys, Stacy's Curves has pretty much been about utility since day one via that slow and freeze. But Held the Storm allows this build to put out more damage. And then, of course, dip into that utility even more, as this perk increases our damage in two different ways. Held the Storm is not only directly buffing the shatter damage, but it's also spawning stasis projectiles, which will increase our damage a bit more. In our artifact breakdown earlier this season, when you combine this mod with Whisper of Fissures, we're actually able to increase our base shatter damage by around 46%. Now, keep in mind that that increase in damage is heavily carried by our fragments, but Held the Storm is adding around 13% extra shatter damage, albeit the projectiles are rarely consistent for that source of damage. But we'll take it. You see, this build started off just as a way to pump out as many turrets as possible, but with the addition of the artifact mods here and a focus on stasis crystals, we can actually dip into ad clear and have a little extra damage. Now we start looking to our exotics to expand on this more. First on the list, we have Osmiomancy. This is by far the best one here. It comes with the perk Fervent Cold Snap, which grants us 2 charges to our Cold Snap Grenade. This exotic also buffs up the functionality of the base Cold Snap Grenade. So again, you could always just use the grenade itself if you don't want to use the turret, or if you're even trying to just get a freeze off on multiple targets and then give yourself a charge back immediately to then use that turret. Now, if you're truly trying to optimize the gameplay loop for Stacy turrets, fellas, what you want to do is you want to throw a single turret out. Then you want to hit a group of ads with a single Cold Snap Grenade. Now, what this does is that it's going to hit a number of different targets, and every time it hits a target, it will grant you grenade ability energy. Now, this ranges. Obviously, the more enemies, the better, but also the type of enemies that you hit. If it's elites, champions, mini bosses, all of these things can net you your Cold Snap Grenade back instantly, and sometimes it can net you 2 entire Cold Snap Grenades. And you want to do this right, guys, where you literally hit the target with the grenade, it drops to the ground, it bounces around, and in this process, it's granted granting you grenade ability energy. This is how you get back-to-back stasis turrets literally everywhere. I'm talking 3, 4, maybe even 5 turrets on a battlefield at once. And understand certain nightfalls, this is more beneficial, right? I think run and gun nightfalls, not necessarily so. But in nightfalls where it's like super ad dense, most notably this week's nightfall, this is perfect. And keep in mind, we don't even have stasis surge for this week's nightfall, but it's that ability to just lock everything down. You're not here for the damage, you're here for the utility, and whatever damage we get extra, that's just gravy. But before we jump into our exotic weapon, that is the best one here, at least from our experience, we need to talk fragments. Whisper of Fissures was just mentioned a second ago, and again, it's that combination of Whisper of Fissures and our artifact mod that really pumps up that shatter damage. And keep in mind, Whisper of Fissures is increasing that shatter damage, whether it's from frozen enemies or destroying any of the stasis crystals that we're going to be spawning. It's going to be quite a bit. We then use Whisper of Shards to grant us a temporary 500% increase in grenade recharge rate for whenever we destroy a stasis crystal. We also have Whisper of Durance. Now, I know when you look at this fragment, it says that slow that you apply to targets lasts longer. And for those abilities that linger, their duration will also increase. Now, what this does for Stacy specifically is that it increases the actual duration of our turrets all the way up to 30 seconds. Now, I was struggling with my weapon damage, which is why we're taking advantage of Whisper of Rending. This increases our primary's weapon damage against frozen targets. And this is fantastic. We're talking a 2 times multiplier. As you can see here against Carr, we're going from 11,682 to 24,970. This is fantastic for the weapon that we're utilizing today, considering we're literally freezing everything. So again, choose what you want, guys. But for me, I find myself relying on Whisper of Durance, Whisper of Rending, Whisper of Fissures, and Whisper of Shards. Keep in mind though, if you want to swap out Rending for a number of other fragments, go right ahead, which takes us to our exotic weapon of choice. The thing that's going to allow us to pretty much place stasis crystals wherever we want, to utilize them defensively, offensively, or just to take advantage of its functionality. And that is Verglass Curse. Now, in case you forgot, this bow received a very nice buff last season, so that Whisper of Fissures detonations will generate Hell Barrage stacks if the stasis crystal was created by this weapon. On top of that, Shiver Quiver now activates when slowing enemies. Now, this bow specializes in freezing enemies and littering the battlefield with stasis crystals. Its perk reads, final blows with this weapon grant stasis arrows, and your next hipfire shots will fire all of them in a single volley. Then for the stasis arrows functionality, they come from the Hellstorm perk that states that direct hits with stasis arrows freeze combatants and slow opposing guardians, and stasis arrows that impact the environment create stasis crystals. And then lastly, the catalyst gives us the perk Shiver Quiver. This speeds up our draw time when freezing or slowing targets. This is perfect for Verglass Curves, guys. Considering that the bow is already a lightweight frame, it already has a very fast draw time of 580. But when you start proccing that exotic catalyst, things really speed up. No, you're not going to be getting the damage that you get from Wish Ender, but you are going to be able to put out way more arrows. And again, if you're dipping into Whisper Rending, that damage is actually really nice. And keep in mind, this is an exotic weapon, so therefore it's doing that 40% more damage against minors. So this bow, guys, can be used as a method to directly freeze enemies or just a tool to spawn stasis crystals. You can literally just sit there and freeze enemies though by spawning stasis crystals next to them. And you're getting the best of both worlds in this case. Because again, if we shatter that crystal, Whisper of Fissures will proc and generate even more Hell Barrage stacks. It's a small subtle change that Bungie made, but it has made a big difference here. Now again, the more stacks of Hell Barrage, the better, as this spawns more crystals. But unlike the past when Verglass Curves first came to us, we used to go out of our way to get 5 crystals stacked up. Now though, you kind of want to use these stasis crystals to hopscotch your way to even more Hell Barrage stacks. Now with all this being said, some of you are probably wondering, Cross, why would I utilize this when there is ignition damage out there? And that's a good point. Looking at ignition damage here, it's dealing 42,717 damage with something like Polaris Lance, and we're able to proc it back to back. And yes, it does feel amazing. It's addicting to watch these constant explosions and ignitions happening over and over. Shatter damage is not nearly as much. We're looking at 12,816 damage from Shatter. And this also depends on how far the enemies are. AoE is not nearly as big. And then of course the chaining and scorching capabilities is not present here. But understand what freezing an enemy is for. It's the purpose of crowd control, not damage. You could still have someone rocking a Polaris Lance build with our Celestial Nighthawk and chaining those ignitions over and over while you're doing this build. Matter of fact, considering artifact mods like Torch, which states that while radiant, you deal increased weapon damage to combatants affected by strain and stasis debuffs, this is what makes this build so perfect. Your teammates can be rocking Torch, and if they're rocking a solar-based build, they've got radiant popping out, and in the process, you're freezing the entire battlefield, which will be increasing their damage. Now, it's not a whole lot. It's 5% more damage, but dude, they already have radiant, so they're pretty much rocking a 30% weapon damage buff at all times. So again, for my folks that are like, Cross, I want damage. Dude, rock a damage build, right? Go crazy. You want to proc ignitions over and over? Have at it. But I breathe a sigh of relief when I join a random fire team in Fireteam Finder and it's a GM and somebody is rocking Stacy's curves. I'm like, thank God, somebody is about to be locking down this room with the right setup though, which takes us to our other mods. For our helmet, we have Harmonic Siphon to spawn orbs from Verglass curves and just heavy ammo finder. For our gloves, we have a bolstering detonation mod to give us our class ability back whenever Stacy deals damage. I like it, but again, I'm trying to utilize grenade kickstart. We're going to be funneling armor charges back into this thing, and if you're topping off your charges really well, you can get back-to-back turrets pretty easily. Granted, keep in mind, grenade kickstart did get nerfed. You got to have armor charges. For our chest piece, we've got resist mods. However, you can rock a charged up mod here. Now, I don't normally recommend charged up, as inside of GMs, we want more damage resist. But considering you're locking down the battlefield, you can lean into this utility even more. For our boots, we have Better Already, and if you can, rock Absolution. This gives you more energy for your abilities. Again, we're not really going for damage here. We're not triple stacking surges. Everything here is for utility. For our class mods, we have 2 bomber mods to finish the loop between using our turrets. And if you want more ability energy, you could take advantage of things like Explosive Finisher. Finishers restore grenades. Consume 3 or more stacks of armor charge, granting additional energy for each charge consumed. This is another way, guys. If orbs are raining around you, you might as well take advantage of it. A lot of people forget about these mods. To this day, I still take advantage of Special Finisher, especially when I'm utilizing special weapons like Indebted Kindness. But if you don't want to go that route, you can, of course, rock Utility Kickstart. But again, just like we mentioned about Grenade Kickstart, you gotta have armor charges. Now, as far as the gameplay loop goes, it's the same as it's always been. Throw out turrets, freeze enemies. Keep in mind that Stacy can stun both overloads and unstoppable champions. Utilize Verglass Curve, though, to clean up those frozen enemies, then spawn more Stasis crystals with Verglass. All of this will assist in granting us more grenade energy thanks to our fragments, therefore spitting out more Stasis turrets. This is a very easy build, guys, but its utility is unmatched. You are the person that will keep your fire team alive. And in Ad-Dense Nightfalls, that's what you need. In Nightfalls, where it's like, hey, you got this area and you need to defend yourself, this is the build you want to have. At least one person rocking it. And back in the day, when Glassway was one of the hardest Nightfalls inside of Destiny, you had to have somebody rocking Stacy. It was the only way. You had no other way of keeping those wyverns under control, as well as overload champions. And keep in mind, back then, Stasis didn't have the ability to counter or stun those champions. It was simply just to freeze them. But now that it has the ability to deal with unstoppables and overloads, Stacy's curves has never been better. Now, do I want Stasis to get better in the future? Absolutely. I think these artifact mods are something that definitely aids this build even more. But keep in mind, this build was already good to begin with. Well, fellas and ladies, thank you all for coming and watching. And as always,
slap that like button like your mama told you right.